trying to find the slide that I'm supposed to show in between sessions.
Oh yes, do make sure that you can screen share, because we had
a
minor issue with that earlier.
Do you want to try sharing screens first, Erland, or?
I can try to do that. So we just make sure that nothing unexpected happens. Well, you can try to do that. Let's see screen 1. Yes, share.
I see your screen.
Lovely.
I'll drop off the speaker thing and I'll join as a participant a bit later on. It was super nice having the opportunity to talk to all of you and be here. So yeah, I loved all of it.
Adnan, you're coming to SQL Saturday Stockholm, right?
I will have to check. I'm in.
No.
No. There's no checking. Just pencil it in. May 21st.
It's like elbow it in.
I seem to recall there are some disclaimers in the for the event itself, whether it's actually going to take place. So I mean, it's difficult for GD to say, oh, I will be coming, because maybe there is no event to come to, or whatever's going to happen.
I mean,
I'm just covering my behind. I've had to cancel one event before.
We don't know if it's going to take place, but Adnan will be there anyway. So
just like the easiest part, just like shoot me like the link thing, sign up thing for like on Twitter, and I'll just never message you back. I think that's the best.
You're explaining my whole online experience, basically.
No, I'm kidding. I'll just message you, but just shoot me the link and I'll check it out. I just need to grab a quick coffee so I don't like just drop from exhaustion. But yeah, see you guys in a bit.
See you, Adnan. Thank you again. Enjoy your coffee.
Bye.
Bye.
I am going to share this now.
Yep, do that.
And now you'll share. It's very.
I'm gonna drop off as well. Leave everything in your capable hands, and it was have a great afternoon. I'm gonna tune into the rest of it as an attendee. So
who has these capable hands? I haven't seen them. Oh, Daniel. Perfect.
bye.
Bye.
So this is the Swedish corner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder what Daniel is doing, because Magnus was supposed to be the moderator, but I guess Daniel is here to moderate Magnus when he's moderating me.
I'm just crashing the session. That's what I do on GroupBy.
Okay, but you've seen this session.
I've seen this session. Yes, I'm just here for shooting the breeze.
I think I've seen it too, actually.
I mean, technically, having seen a session shouldn't disqualify me from seeing it again, because I don't think I understood it. Not all the nuances, anyway.
That could very well be the case.
Yes.
But you're very welcome to listen to it again. But just in case, I said nothing much of it. Well, I think there's one small tweak to one of the demos, but that's just a very small thing. And there's also some. It's going to be a few minutes shorter, given the fact that because in a user group you have, then you can splash out more or less as much time as you want. But
I mean, I don't want to give you any ideas, but you have 90 minutes.
Yes, so but I'm thinking that
I've seen you present.
Yeah, but I'm thinking that there should be 50 minutes for the next speaker. Maybe there could be some Q&A, and then the next speaker may want to come in and set things up, etc. So I figured that's 75, and also attendees may want to have little break to go to get a coffee, or go to the gents, ladies, or get a snack, or talk with the children, or whatever they want to do at home. So they might also appreciate if there is not too time between the sessions.
I think my longest 60-minute session was 90 minutes, and then we had some Q&A. But it's all because you were in the audience, Erland. It was
my longest 60-minute session. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure which event to talk about, but if it's user group, as I said, then things you can be don't have to be that very tight. But if you have a conference like this, no matter whether it's online or a GroupBy, or online or in person, and there is a schedule, you can't really just go 90 minutes and then the next person have to wait. That's just indecent.
Yeah, that's true. And it's same actually with SQL Friday. I had one speaker last season who was, I think, an hour 40 past before I stopped him. Oh, but I'm just halfway done. It was interesting all the way there. A bit too long for lunch break.
So for the sessions I've seen and moderated yesterday and today, I think most of them, some have been 40 minutes-ish, and many of them have been 89.5 minutes. I don't know if that's a theme.
Okay.
But so many people have so many interesting things to share, so I'm not complaining.
I'm trying to figure out, there they are, participant list. And I guess Q&A window should be open. It sounds when I talk like this is the first time I'm even on a digital meeting, but it's gonna work out.
It'll be fine.
There we go.
Oh, I see that SA has attending the meeting. That's great, because this is a security session.
Good.
I thought we disabled that.
We renamed it, I think, as a kind of best practice, but I mean, it doesn't make a difference really.
I saw someone present, I can't remember now who did it, but I've sort of fallen in love with the idea of renaming the SA account to Totally Not SA. But I wouldn't do that in production because I've heard horror stories about how it crashes upgrades.
Okay. Oh, upgrades. I don't like it. But,
Just spin up a new managed instance and you're done. Questions?
you know,
Yes, who's paying the bill?
Someone else.
Yeah.
no, but for real, to run SQL Server in, let's say, just build a 2-node Kubernetes cluster on premise, 2 machines. You have to need 2 machines anyway. It makes for an easy upgrade compared to doing Windows failover clustering. So I think if I build a new environment, I wouldn't think so much about Windows. I'd have to work a day or two to solve the Windows authentication pieces, which I still want, but it works.
I've seen quite a few Kubernetes demos that have crashed. I wouldn't, talk to a client and say, "Hey, Kubernetes is the way to go. That's really how you should run your production environment now." I don't have the kind of liability insurance for that.
No, that's not how you do it. You talk to the enterprise architect at the client.
Oh dear.
And get him to decide.
Yeah, and just sprinkle in some microservices there. It'll be great.
Yeah. Yeah, this is so lightweight. That's usually sells it. Oh,
Yeah. Well, I've tried to do some, at least play with the Kubernetes, but I've working from, I think, from Bob Ward's book, but I found that it went over my head.
I do Docker containers for development environments all the time, but yeah, I agree.
I mean, for dev, totally, absolutely.
I'm not good enough at containers at all to design a production environment myself, but I mean, I probably would bring in someone who knows what they're doing instead of me not knowing what I'm doing.
I mean, because when it goes toes up, all you have to do is just restart it, but that's not the game in production. That's where I get nervous.
What?
You've never had a Docker container crash, I know.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, the Kubernetes thing works for production workloads, but it's big data cluster. It's rarely where you put your transactional workloads. So it might be okay if it's down for an hour or so while you do something.
Hmm.
My client decided that the container platform to use is going to be OpenShift. Not sure why, but it makes life a bit harder than just AKS, I guess. At least to me, everything with Red Hat on it is more complicated.
Do you say that from a licensing perspective or from a technical perspective?
Both, but licensing very often brings a technical difficulty to it as well. Because and even more so with IBM products, it's like it doesn't work. We follow the manual. Oh, okay, we forgot to load this manual file that we have to get on, probably on a tape drive sent with maybe
a zip drive. Do you remember those?
Yeah. Oh, those were the times. I guess we have seen the code of conduct. What tab we will be online shortly. There we go.
There's a sponsor slide as well somewhere in there.
Maybe that should be shown. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
because we love our sponsors.
Yes. Yeah. Who doesn't love sponsors?
Well, I don't like having to find sponsors, but it's nice when the invoice is paid. Oh. No, but thank you, Redgate, and SolarWinds, and SQL Solutions Group, and Minionware. Did I forget anyone? No, I think that was that.
I'm going to say I think Data Masterminds are in there, but I think there are different sponsor tiers or something. I don't know.
That's William, right?
Right. So they're core sponsors according to the homepage, and it appears that, yeah. I see different sponsors on the sponsor slide and on the homepage, but Data Masterminds is definitely in there.
Maybe they came in after the sponsors after the template was sent out.
Yeah, probably.
I've been into some SQL Saturdays. You basically on Saturday morning. Oh, here's the new sponsor slide because they whipped up one more sponsor.
Yeah.
It's 4:30 in the afternoon, my time. I don't know what time it is wherever you are, but we're at GroupBy, and the next speaker is Erland, and he is online. That's a good start. Erland is going to talk about packaging permissions in stored procedures. So very old school, but still extremely widely used, which I'm glad for. I like stored procedures. Erland, you have written an article about the same thing. It's longer than this session, I think, but I guess the session is based on the article.
Yeah, so basically, as I'm going to say later on, the session is basically a teaser for the article. So to get you started on the topic, you might find that, well, some of these stuff will be, yeah, I might as well share my screen then. So, yeah, so I will come back to that in a second. So just like to first of all welcome you all to this session entitled Packaging Permissions in Stored Procedures. And before we go on with the session itself, I'd like to remind you that yes, we have a code of conduct for this conference. So whenever you post things in the chat, be nice, be gentle, just behave. That's what we like you to do. I also again like to thank you the sponsors: Redgate, SolarWinds, SQL Solutions Group, Minionware, and also whatever more that might be on the page that didn't make it onto the slides. So because without this event, without the sponsors, this event would have been either not been at all, or been maybe a lot less as good as it is from a technical perspective. So then, who am I then? Well, my name is Erland Sommarskog. I live in Stockholm, where I work as an independent consultant, and I've been MVP for SQL Server now for more than 20 years. And I have a website, Sommarskog.se, which you can say is a small collection of large articles. And indeed, one of these large articles is called Packaging Permissions in Stored Procedures. And as I said previously, this presentation is, well, it's kind of a teaser for that article. So it's a condensed version of it. And you might think that, oh, that was a lot of content, but then you can go back and read the article. I rewrote that article a couple of years back, and then I pushed some material to an appendix, thinking, oh, maybe the article will be shorter. And I found out that oh, wait a minute, it became 60% longer. longer, but I don't think I added that much more material. Rather, I think I'm explaining things in a slower pace now. At least that is my hope. But I can say, I wrote this first version of this article way back in 2006, and it took me quite a few years before all pennies really dropped about these things. Some of these things are quite intricate how they work. The great news is, though, you can use this stuff by only knowing the mechanics and some of the scripts and automation stuff that I'm going to show you. But still, of course, it helps to understand what's really going on under the covers. Here's my email address. That is how you get hold of me. If you have any questions, I don't answer right now. By the way, if there are any questions in the chat, just please we take that on the spot. So Magnus, if you see anything, just interrupt me and I'll take that directly. But anyway, if there's anything I don't answer right now, but comes to you later on, just feel free to drop me a line at sql@sommarskog.se. And slides and scripts for this presentation are available on my website right now, sommarskog.se/present. So if there's anything, if I move on too fast and you want to take photos, whatever, no problem. Just go there and get the goods. So what is this all about then? So you have a let's say this, we have a database, and in this database, we have a user. And now this user needs to perform a specific action that requires permission X. That could be a plain select permission, or it could be something that requires sysadmin. However, we don't really want to grant that permission directly, because then the user might be able to do a lot more that he or she should not be able to do. So let's say we want the user to be able to see its own line in the employees table, or if the user is a manager, well, his own line and all his or her subordinates. But that's it. So we can't grant select on that table directly. Or it could be that we have a junior DBA that should be able to do something we know that junior DBA is capable of doing, or at least we have somehow packaged to control, but certainly we don't want to make that junior DBA to be sysadmin. So wouldn't it then be nice if we could package that in permission inside of the procedure with full control of what the user can do? Now you might say, wait a minute, isn't that the way it works? No. That's not the way it works in the general case. There is, however, a very special case, but also a very common case where this works. But what we're going to learn today is how we can do this in all the other cases. So here's my agenda. I will start to talk about ownership chaining, which is that very common but special, or that's very special but common case. And then I will talk about certificate signing, which is what we use when that ownership chaining is not applicable, and how we can use that both for database and server level permissions. Then I will talk about the execute as clause, which is serves the same purpose but in a different way, and in my opinion, not so good way, but also database and server level, and that will eventually lead us also to talking about the dangers of making a database trustworthy. The last thing I will cover in this session is to do this for cross-database access, and that will be very compressed and cover very briefly, because by that we will be kind of a little bit of exhausted. So ownership chaining, this is something to my knowing that has been in the product since 1.0. So the way it works is this. If you have this procedure, or it could be a view or a function or a trigger, which makes an access to another object, a table, etc. And these two objects, they have the same owner. SQL Server will not make any permission checks whatsoever for, plain email like select, insert, update, delete, merge. Also, if you go and call another procedure or function. However, ownership chaining does not apply if the access is through dynamic SQL. It does not apply if we go and inquire about metadata about the object, nor if the operation requires special permissions such as alter. So let's have a look at this, and we're going to start this demo with setting up a database. So we're going to first create a database called Perm test, and I'm going to make SA. I think that was one of the attendants, so that attendant, we're going to keep an extra eye on that guy or gal, because it's going to own that database. Now, let's see here. Sorry about that, folks. I need to run a cleanup script. Seems like I've not been doing this. Did this last time I did this. Okay. So sorry about this, folks. Okay. So SA is going to own this database, and I'm going to say this right out. it's not good practice, in my opinion, having SA to own databases. It's very common because people have realized it's not a very good idea having an individual owning a database because maybe that person leaves the company, etc. But what is the best solution? I will return to that. However, for the better part of this presentation, SA is going to own this database. So then I'm going to create a test user we're going to work with. I'm going to log in for that. And the password will be obladi oblada. And then I'm going to move over to Perm test, and I'm going to create a user here called the test user, or rather create a user for my test user in the database, create a role called rock and roll, and make test user a member of rock and roll. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a diagnostic view called token info, and it's going to returns 3 columns from this kind of DMV called system user token, and also these 3 system functions: original login, system user, and user. And I'm going to come back later on when we see the data, what this data actually means. Next thing I'm going to do is I will create a table called Perm table. And it's a quite simple table. There is an ID, there's a title, and there's also an auditing column with the database user that added the row. And I'm going to add one title, Strawberry Fields Forever. And now I'm going to create a test procedure, which starts with returning data from that diagnostic view. It adds a row to Perm table and then returns all data in Perm table right now. And I'm going to give rock and roll permissions to run that procedure. Now, so far, this completes the setup. And what we have done so far, there is a table, but no one has permission to do anything with the table. The only permission we have granted is that rock and roll may run test_sp. Now, I'm going to run test_sp as test user. You might expect that I will now, when I say this, I'm going to open a second window, log in as test user. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use this very handy command, execute as user, and impersonate test user. This is very, very handy if you want to test permissions. So rather than logging in a second window, you can just use this command. And this might also be a user that you created without login, only just to test permissions. So that will be test user until I've executed this command, revert. And this command revert does not have to be in a batch of its own, but I very strongly recommend that you put a go right just in front, because if this thing here goes wrong, that might abort execution, and then revert will not be executed. And then you will be thinking that you are yourself again, and then you will, when you get error messages, you get very confused. I know, because been there, done that more than once. I've learned this the hard way. So what's going to happen now is that test user is going to run test_sp and try to add the row fixing a hole. And you can see that worked out. Fixing a hole was added by test user, despite the fact that test user does not have any permissions on Perm table. We can also now see the output from this view. So first of all, these are the columns from sysuser token. So that's one row for every security token present on database level. And there's one for test user itself, the user, and the 2 roles that test user are a member of, public and rock and roll. And then there is a row, usage, saying grant or deny. So this security token is good both for grant and for deny. And then we have these 3 system functions. Original login, that was the login that actually logged into SQL Server. So that's me, %10/Sommar, that's me. But system user, well, that is the current server principal, the current login on server level. And because we're impersonating test user, that's test user. And this is the current user on the database level. It's also test user. Now, we're going to play things around here so we're going to change the owner of the procedure to different owner. And because this is only a user I create in the database, I'm going to do this, create user without login. As I mentioned, this is really great if you want to test permissions, because then you don't have to play with passwords, etc. Particularly handy if you don't have permissions on server level. You can still do that only if you are DB owner in the database. So I'm going to make this different owner, the owner of test_sp, and because when I do this, the permissions disappear, I have to run the grant execute again. And test user now tries to run test_sp again and enter mean Mr. Mustard. But there are 3 permissions error. He can't access token info, he can't access Perm table twice. Because that is because now different owner owns test_sp, which means, I mean, if different owner now, so there has to be a permission check. Let's say a different owner, that's just low priv user, creates a procedure that goes and accesses table owned by DBO. it would be completely crazy if that would permit the users running it to insert data to those tables. There has to be a permission check when the ownership chain is broken. Now, one reason you might not have ever thought about this is that in very most databases, everything is owned by DBO. Having a different owner is kind of exotic, although there are situations where it makes sense. But in very many databases, everything is owned by DBO. So we're going to restore ownership to DBO on the procedure, and we have to grant the permission again for execution. And test user makes a second attempt to add admin Mr. Mustard. And indeed, now the row is entered. Now, we're going to change this test procedure around a little bit to try different things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some dynamic SQL, some bad dynamic SQL. Look here, this one is wide open to SQL injection. So the test user could enter a single quote and then some command and then, well, 2 hyphens to kill these stuff, and they could do something else. Okay, this is only 40 characters, but you can still do something in 40 characters. So let's see what happens now. So test user now runs this and enters love me do. And we get this error. The select permission was denied on the object perm table, database perm test schema DBO. But you can see here the dynamic part. But if we go back here, love me do was entered. The only thing that failed was this select. And the reason this fails is that this is a separate stop procedure of its own. It's not part of test SP. It's a nameless procedure, and it doesn't really have an owner, or maybe it's that test user is the owner, but it's not owned by DBO. So there is no ownership chaining, which is a very good thing, because let's say ownership chaining had applied here. Well, then test user could go and say, okay, as I said, single hyphen, well, select star from important table. A table he test user should have absolutely no business in, but where he could even delete or update data on that one, because then he would have all the powers of DBO when it comes to insert, update, delete, and select. So it's a very good thing that ownership chaining is not applicable here. Now, here's another thing we can run into if we're not careful, and we watch out. So we are going to add this parameter called reset, and when that parameter is 1, that permits the user to clear the table entirely to start over. And because Truncate Table is more efficient than delete, well, but then we're going to use Truncate Table. So we create this guy, this version, and test user now tries to clear the table and also enter Martha, my dear, but cannot find the object perm table because this does not exist, or you do not have permissions. And we don't see any out. Well, we see this output, but that's it. And this is because this table, Truncate Table, although logically it deletes all row in the table, just like delete perm table would do, it actually requires auto permissions. Why? Well, that's a topic for a different discussion. It has always been this way. And this is something which is really quite devilish, but I guess has burned more than one person, more than one developer. Maybe they didn't even notice that it didn't work, but anyway, so we have some kind of deployment problem here. It might be that the procedure exists, but the table for some reason has not been created yet. So rather than the user should have an ugly error message being splashed in the face, oh, invalid object in perm table, we more quietly going to say no table today. So we make a check here on object ID. Does the table exist? If we get back an object ID, and then we do the insert and the select, else we're going to say no table today. And test user then runs this and tries to enter the fool on the hill. And sure enough, the test user feels like a fool when it says no table today. Wait a minute, what? I was able to insert rows into that table just seconds ago. I did see it with my own eyes. What's going on? Well, what's going on is this, that to go any inquiry about metadata about an object, be that through a function like object ID or going to query the catalog views like sys.schema, sys.object, etc., you'll need to at least have the permission view definition of the object, the actual user. It does not come with ownership chaining. So again, if this is something you put in your procedure and you don't grant permissions, well, then you can get into problems. And now we're going to look in how to resolve these problems. So far ownership chaining, and when it works and when it does not. Let's now talk about certificate signing, which is the way to go when ownership chaining is not applicable. And I'm going to start off with giving a recipe, which is going to sound like quite a bit of mumbo jumbo, but then I will try to explain all these details and also eventually show you how to automate this recipe. So the first step is you create a certificate, you sign the procedure with that certificate, then you create a user from that certificate and grant that user the permissions needed. And that could actually be membership in the role, if that would be applicable. Now, so what does all this means? Well, first of all, certificates and signatures. This is something that's not specific to SQL Server and to procedures, but no, this is a general solution in IT security. A certificate is, well, it's an asymmetric key that has 3 components, you could say. There is a private key that you keep secret and protect, locked in the drawer in a safe, or, well, a password or whatever, but it's secret and private. There's also a public key that you can share with anyone. Anyone can go and download that from your homepage or whatever. And there is also some metadata, including a signature on the certificate itself, and also some more stuff that we don't have to really bother about. For the thing we're going to work with, we can work with self-signed certificates. For more serious stuff, you might buy a certificate from, let's say, VeriSign or whatever, the Global Sign, whatever they're called these days. Now, the cool thing about certificates is that you can sign, if you're going to send something like a document, a PDF, or an email, whatever, you can sign that with your private key. Now, the person who receives that document or email can take your public key, run some algorithm to verify the signature. And if the signature comes out, yes, validates as positive, you know that, well, the document was from you and it has not been tampered with in transport. That's a great thing to secure authenticity. Now, so what has this to do with STOP procedures? So if you invoke a STOP procedure, which has been signed, SQL Server will first check, is the signature still valid? And if it is, yeah, SQL Server says, oh, is there a user tied to that certificate? And if that is the case, SQL Server is going to add this user to sys.user token. And therefore, the permissions of that user will imply inside that procedure. This may still not register, but we're going to look at this later on. So, but that's also, I should say this user is a very special type of user. If you think, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to create extra users in my database. That sounds like a security risk, but it's a very special type of user. You cannot log in as this user, nor can you impersonate it. You could say the user is kind of a kludge. They needed something to connect the certificate and the permissions. And they thought that granting permissions to a certificate sounded, well, creepy. In the kind of way it does, but yeah, but so it's a bridge between the permissions and the certificate, and you can only create one per certificate. By the way, yeah, you can only create one user per certificate. So let's now have a look at this. So I'm going to move to Perm test, and I'm going to create our certificate here. Create certificate DemoCert, encryption my password. All you need is love. With subject, a certificate to demonstrate procedure signing. Now, let's have a look at this command a little more. When you create a certificate, and that which includes a private key, you have to protect it by some way. And we're going to use passwords. In many cases, if you use certificates for encryption, you often have it protected by the database master key, but that will just be kludge in this case. That will just be complicated. So passwords will be easier. And if you think keeping track of passwords is going to be a problem, don't worry, we're going to look at that later on. You also have to give a subject, which is, well, I think the subject is supposed to have some sort of grammar, but you can put in any free text, at least if you put it in double quotes from start to end. As a matter of fact, this thing with the double quotes is something I only learned last week when I got a mail from a correspondent who had been reading my article. Previously, I ran into some problem if I use some special characters. But if you put in double quotes here, then you're safe. So the next thing that is then to go to sign the procedure. And you say add signature to test SP by certificate DemoCert. And because I need to use the private key to do the signing, I have to give the password to access the private key. So add signature to test SP by certificate DemoCert with password. All you need is love. Before we move on to the next step in the recipe, let's have a look at this. So there is this view called sys.crypt properties. So this view holds old signatures in the database, And then we can view that, join that to sys certificates. And we do the join on the column called thumbprint, because a thumbprint is what uniquely identifies the certificates. I think it's 32 bytes. And then we also use join to sys objects and sys schemas to get the name of the procedures. And we can run this query. And so DBA test SP is signed by DMAcert. We can also see the subject, because that might contain some useful information. And here is this is the thumbprint, and here is out to the right is the signature. Well, it's a blob, so it's very unexciting to look at. So let's move on to step 3, create DMAcert user from certificate DMAcert. So that's the extra thing I need to add to connect it to the certificate. I can run this, but now if I try to create a second user from that certificate, I get an error message. So I can't do that. And let's have a look at this user in sys database principles. And we can see here the DMAcert user, it's a certificate mapped user, and authentication type desk is none, meaning we cannot log in as this user. So then let's do the final step, grant select on Perm table to DMAcert user, because that's the permission we're going to need for the remaining demos. Now, let's just, as a reminder, this is how test SP looked when we signed it. So we have this version going select from token info. We do this check, does Perm table actually exist before we do the insert and select, else we print no table today. So test user is now going to do a second test on this one, and now trying to enter across the universe. And indeed, across the universe was entered. Now, if we look up here, there are 4 rows in this user token. There is also DMAcert user, type, user map to certificate, grant or deny. And because this user has select permission on Perm table, everything works now as desired. Now, well, we got some complaints because people thought, yeah, it was good to put in that check, but that no table today, that's just cryptic. Couldn't you make that a little clearer? And we think, wait a minute, doesn't people know about hits from the 60s and Herman's Hermits? Oh, well, we grudgingly agreed to change the text to Perm table has not been created yet. So then test user now try to enter this, try to run this and enter here come the sun. And you might actually think for a second, is this going to work out or not? Think of, if you get an idea of what I've been talking about, you might get, oops, yes. So let's see. No, it doesn't seem like that. Perm table has not been created yet. And you can see there are now, again, only 3 tokens. So because we changed the text of the procedure, this means that the signature is no longer valid. And therefore, SQL Server is not going to add DMAcert user to the tokens. As a matter of fact, SQL Server takes this 1 step further, because if we run this query, it comes back empty. SQL Server realizes that it's no use keeping the signature because the content has changed. I'll throw it away. So we need to sign it again. Add signature to test SP by certificate DMAcert with password. All you need is love. And test user now tries to run here comes the sun once more. And now it works out because again, DMAcert user is here. Now let's try this with some of the other variations. So this is the dynamic part again. Let's create that dynamic part again and sign it directly. And test user is now going to run this and try to enter TextMan. And indeed, we did not get an error message this time, but we did get back the result of that dynamic select, that where we selected by title. And DMAcert, so this tells us that when we enter the dynamic SQL, the security token of DMAcert user is still present and can contribute with select permissions. Now, thinking about here about the problem with SQL injection, there is still a problem, but it's now limited to doing select permissions on Perm table. So test user could abuse this to retrieve rows from Perm table test user is not intended to see, which can be bad enough if it is, let's say, an employees table, but at least the damage is limited. It's not the entire database. That's a kind of great feature. Of course, you shouldn't write bad dynamic SQL like this, but sometimes you might have junior developers that does this. So it's a good thing. I think it diminishes the damage. So we're going to do some more things. We're going to try to look more how that user token would remains in token info or not. So I'm going to create a trigger here called Perm table tree on the table, and all it does is return information from token info and print the name of the trigger, and also an instance procedure with the same idea. And then they're going to create a version of test SP, which, well, returns the data from token info. It runs a system procedure on Perm table. It runs the init procedure, inserts a row into Perm table, which will fire the trigger, and then also again return the data in the trigger. Before I assign it, I'm going to run it on its own so we can see the result of the procedure, of the system procedure. And test user now enters revolution number 9. And you can see here, SP help index. I don't know about our Perm table, that does not exist. So again, ownership chaining does not apply because it was called from a procedure owned by DBA. Now test user needs to have permission on SP help index, on the table directly to run SP help index, even if it's being called by a procedure from a procedure owned by DBA. But you can see here that revolution number 9 was indeed inserted. Now we're going to assign this procedure, and we're going to test user is going to run this and enter helter skelter. And yes, now SP help index does not error out. So again, the token of the certificate user is still present when we entered that system procedure. But now look here. In RESP, if you look to the right, you can see there is no scroll bar. There are only 3 rows. Same thing for the trigger. There is no scroll bar. And by the way, yes, helter skelter was entered, but there are only 3 rows. That is, when we entered the procedure and when we entered the trigger, DMOcert user was removed from this user token. This is actually, I think, very elegant. When we enter the dynamic SQL, when we enter the system procedures, things we cannot sign, the token remains. But here we have the choice. If we want the permissions of DMOcert user to apply also to the trigger or the procedure, well, then we can sign that one as well. But let's say that in the procedure, for some reason, we'll do an explicit permission check. I don't know why, but let's say that. Well, or the trigger. Well, it would not be tripped by the fact that the caller had been signed by something. That would still remain. We have the choice there. And this will be even more important when we're going to look at server level permissions. Now, before I leave this demo, I'm just going to drop the trigger and go back to the slides just to repeat what we have seen. So every time we change the procedure, yes, we need to sign it again. And when we enter dynamic SQL and system procedures, well, the token of and the permissions of the certificate user are still present. But when we enter nested procedures, triggers or functions, things you can sign yourself, the token is removed. So we need to sign these ourselves if we want the permissions of the certificate user to apply there as well. Now, so far we have looked at the mechanics. You might think running all these commands, this is just going to be a nightmare. How can I think? Answer is, how are you going to use this? You're going to automate it. And I've done that work for you. So I got this to a procedure called grant perms to SP that automates the recipe. So what it does, it takes 2 parameters, the name of the procedure, and a table of value parameters with the permissions you want to package into this procedure. And well, it creates a certificate, and the name of the certificate is formed from the name of the procedure. So you can easily tie them together. And the password, well, it's a random grid because we will only need the password once when we sign the procedure. Then we can throw it away. And the subject will be the permissions granted. So you can see when you look into the certificates, oh, why do I have this certificate? Oh, because, oh, I'm granting these permissions. And it signs the procedure with the certificate, creates a user from the certificate, name from the procedure. Again, so you can see from this user exists because of this procedure. And then grants the certificate's user the permissions in the TVP. And if you run the whole thing again, it's going to drop everything and start over. So you can, oh, the permissions were wrong. Well, then you can easily change that and it will take care of that for you. And here is an example. So you have to declare the table variable. And because we're going to use it as a parameter, there has to be a table type called permission list. And so, for example, select on Perm table. And then we have a call here. And yes, there is a third parameter, actually, a debug parameter. So which it's going to print all the generated commands. So you can see these So that's a really great thing to do when you run this on your own the first couple of times, so you can see what is actually going on. How you use it depends a little bit, but I would suggest that in very many cases, you're going to put this in your deployment script. So they read. Great procedure or great role to procedure, go, and then you have these at the end if you need to. But if you have junior programmers, well, then you might, as a lead DBA or lead developer, have a separate script for these which you control yourself. So you will only add this after having reviewed the code. You can do that if you want to. Very important thing when you do this, you should always identify the minimum permissions you need to package with the procedure. This is always when you work with permissions. I mean, it's called PULP, the principle of least permissions. Never grant more permissions than needed. It can take some time to figure out, but it's really worth it, particularly if you have an SQL injection hole. And maybe that SQL injection hole wasn't there when you wrote the procedure, but then you have a junior developer going in and fixing something, or all of a sudden there is. And if you have granted just minimum permissions, like if it's only select, you have limited the damage of that injection hole. So let's have a look at this. And I'm going to start with changing test SP to that reset version, which has that reset parameter and doing truncate table. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create the procedure, but I'm not going to slight change to what I showed on the slide. I'm going to put this in a separate schema called management. And the reason for this, I'm thinking that many cases, it's very practical to grant permissions to users directly on the DBO schema. So you don't have to go and grant permissions on every procedure, because that's very tedious. But then they should not be able to run this procedure. So I'm thinking it's a great, for stuff like this, it's a great idea to put in these in the side schema called, let's say, call it management, or other any kind of management procedures you do. Not that users would be able to do anything with it, because everything it does requires permissions. But nevertheless, it's quite a good thing to put it aside. So that's why I have this schema. I'm going to create the table type. And here now comes the procedure itself. And I'm not going to discuss it in detail, because that is mainly an exercise in dynamic SQL. And I think this is a very good example of well-written dynamic SQL. But hey, I'm partial because I wrote it. But I'm very much encourage you to have a look at it. But for this now, I'm asking. So here's the parameter, the procedure name, the permission, the table value parameter, and the debug parameter, which defaults to 0. So you don't have to specify that one. But I'm just going to scroll through. Oops. And but then we're going to look at it in action. So we need to package some permissions here. Yes, the user should be able to delete everything. So yes, delete on Perm table. That's what we need, isn't it? So yeah, you can see how the commands create certificate test SP $cert. So that's the name of the procedure, and then add $cert at the end. And if you're thinking dollar has some special meaning, it has not. It's just any character. I could have used underscore, whatever here. The password, yes, it's a grid. And with the subject, grant delete on Perm table. So we can see that it's being stored in the table. If we need to look at it, add signature, and we run that query that I showed you before. Add signature to test SP by certificate test SP $cert with the password. And then create the user, test SP $cert user, again, the name form from the procedure, from certificate test SP $cert, and grant delete. That's what it's doing. So test user is now going to try to run this and enter paperback writer. And cannot find the object Perm table because it does not. Oh yeah. Oh, stupid me. Delete on Perm table. It should be also, of course. So I need to run this again. And of course, there is a purpose that I actually did that error, because now we can see what happens when we rerun. It drops the signature by DBO test SP from certificate test SP $cert. By the way, if that would be had been signed by another certificate with a different name, the procedure is not going to do that. It's only going to drop a certificate, a signature by this particular name. Drop that user, drop that certificate. It's going to work only with these. And then it creates a new certificate. It's the same name, but it's a new certificate because it will have a different thumbprint. And then it runs add signature, create user, and all that again. So test user now tries to, again, to enter paperback writer and clear the table. And indeed, paperback writer is now the only row in the table, and we can see how among the tokens, test the speed on search user contributing with the author the author permission on that table. So far we have looked at doing this on database level. Let's now look at this at doing this at server level. And let me first introduce a scenario. So we have an instance with quite a few databases on it for different applications. And these databases, well, there are power users who do a lot of work in the databases. So they have DB owner permissions. They could be developers, whatever people, but these people do not have any server level permissions, nor should they have. But they do have a legit need to see which users that are connected to their database. For instance, oh, no one is connected right now, then I can do some maintenance, for instance. Now, the problem is that to do this, well, you can look at the view sys.dmx accessions, but that one requires view server state. Well, if not, you will only see your own session. But you can't grant these people view server state because then you could see any user on the system. And that may, let's say if this is a big corporations with people for different departments, no, you don't want to see them completely different unrelated user IDs. Or even worse, it's a hosting service. So they could be from people from different customers. No. That is absolutely not the information you want to expose. Certificates comes to the rescue. And I'm just going to have some water before I move on. So, and first we're going to look at how this works when we put the procedure in the master database. And then it's very similar to doing this in the user database. We create a certificate in master, we sign the procedure with the certificate. Then we create a login from that certificate and grant the login required permissions. Because when we work with server level permissions, we grant these to logins, not to users. Well, but while it's called a login, it's not a login that can log in. Confusing, isn't it? Well, they also call it server principals. Again, this login exists only to connect permissions and certificates. And there is also a syslogin token, the same thing as sysuser token. So let's have a look at this. So first of all, I'm going to start in master and create a little more setup. So we're going to create a role here called super users, which are for these, well, power users in the databases. And we're going to create a login called Perm to super with the password of yesterday, and add that user to super users. And then I'm going to create a view called login token info. It's the same idea as before, except that now I've retrieved data from syslogin token. And then I'm going to create a procedure here called sp_show users in DB. Now, because it starts with sp_ and exists in master, this means that I can invoke it from any database. And then the procedure will execute in the context of the database it was invoked from. Yes, your own system procedure. But beware, this is undocumented, unsupported, and it could break in any future release. Particularly, Microsoft could ship their own procedure with the same name in the resource database, and it would take precedence over your local private procedure. So you can do this, but you will have to do it on your own risk. Anyway, we start with returning the information from login token info, and then we perform a permission check because we need to check, is the user a member of super users, or is it someone who has sysadmin, or, well, in this fact, control server, which is the level just below sysadmin. In that case, we run this query, select star from sysdmx accessions, where database ID is equal to the current database. Else, we tell you, no, you don't have the permissions to run this procedure. Now, you might think it's a little funny of doing the permission check inside the procedure. Why not just simply only grant permissions to the super users? Well, the problem is when you grant database permissions or grant permissions to run the procedures, sorry, that is a database level permissions. So you have to grant that to database users. Now, which database users do you have in master? Do you create users in master for your logins? I don't. No, there is really only one alternative in master: public. So that's why the permission check is inside the procedure. So anyway, we're going to move over to Perm test, and I'm first going to run this on our own just to see that the concept works. And well, first of all, you can see my tokens. I got lots of tokens. I collect tokens. I love tokens. Yeah, if you're logged in with a Windows authentication, you get a lot more tokens than if you have SQL logins. Now, you might see here there are 4 rows being returned. But if you look closely in my tab strip, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But this one here is in the master database and not in Perm test. So that's why I only get back 4 rows, which is exactly what we wanted to achieve. Now, we're also going to create now a user for Perm test super in this database and make that user a DB owner because, well, it's a super user in this database. And now, first of all, I'm going to try to run this SPShow users in DB as Perm test super. Now, note here that there's a small change. I do execute as a login because when we work with server permissions, you have to work with logins. Overall, if you are going to impersonate a real login, use execute as login. But execute as user is very handy if you have a user created without login. But because there are some restrictions with execute as users, if you would try to run it here, it would not really work out very well. Well, nor is this one working out very well because you see here, we only see Perm test super only sees its own session because that's all you do when there is no permission. And we can see here among the tokens, Perm test super, public, and super users. And these are the login itself and the 2 roles it's a member of, and grant or deny. And we can see here, system user, the current impersonating system user, and for some reason on database level, it's guest. I don't know why. Don't ask. Anyway, now we're going to fix this with certificates. So I'm going to move back to master and create a certificate called a Daemon Server Cert, encryption by the password, while my guitar gently weeps, and with the subject for signing of the procedure SPShow users in DB. And then I'm going to sign that procedure, add signature to SPShow users in DB, by certificate, Daemon Server Cert with password, while my guitar gently weeps. And then we're going to create a login called Daemon Server Cert login from certificate Daemon Server Cert. And we could try this again here, creating a second guy. And you see, again, I get an error message. You can only create 1 login per certificate because that's not really the meaning of having multiple ones. It would only be confusing. And we can have a look at this guy and server principles. Let's put that on top. And you can see it's a certificate map login. And you can see there are a few more of these with these hash marks, and they all come with the product itself. There's no authentication type desk here, but you will have to believe me, you cannot log in as this login. That's not possible. Then finally, we're going to grant the permission we need to package, and that's view server state to Daemon Server Cert login. So moving back to Perm test and running as Perm test super again. And we can see here, it says all sessions. And now we get 5 rows in login token info. So we have Daemon Server Cert login map to certificate, which contributes with the view server state permission. Then we also have a row for the certificate itself. Why? I don't know. Maybe they had some different ideas when they designed this, that maybe making the certificates tokens, whatever, and then this just happened to remain in sys user token, but it was removed. Sorry, happens to remain in sys login token, but it still remains in sys. Anyway, it might be some artifact of something in the did in the development that is just still there. I don't think it has any meaning though. So far we're doing this on server level, but let's now say we want to have a server level permission in a procedure that resides in a user database. Now, this makes the recipe a little longer. We need to have a few more steps. So first of all, we create the certificate in the user database and sign the procedure. Then we should drop the private key. Why? Well, because let's say that some local power users looking over a shoulder and see the password. Oh, well, then they could use that password and change the procedure and sign it again. That would be bad. So we're not going to permit that, but we're dropping the private key. We ensure that that is not going to happen because all that is needed to verify the signature is the public key. Then you need to copy the certificate, that is the public key, to the master, and in master then create a login from the certificate and grant the login the required permissions. So let's have a look at this. So first of all, I'm going to move to Perm test and create this login token info in this database as well, just to have it handy around. And then, well, we had to open a support case with Microsoft CSS about something, and they found out about our system procedure and told us in no uncertain terms, look, that's unsupported, that's undocumented, don't do that, period. Okay, we thought, oh, yeah, we better comply then. So we decided we're going to put this procedure called show sessions in every user database. Now, we still retaining the permission check because we're thinking that, no, it's only the super users that should be able to do this. Perm to super should not be able, well, Perm to super might grant a permission right to test user to run this procedure, but no, test user do not have any business in this procedure. It's the only one we permit to do this are the super users, also we think. So I'm going to create this guy, and well, Perm to super is trying to run this. But of course, since we haven't assigned it, Perm to super only sees its own session. Okay, so let's now create a new certificate here in Perm test called Demo Server Cert 2 with the password tomorrow never knows for signing up Perm test DBO show sessions. And creating the certificate. And we sign it, add signature to show sessions by certificate Demo Server Cert 2 with password tomorrow never knows. And behind our back, Perm test super is standing looking, oh yeah, tomorrow never knows. Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to change that procedure. Hey, think, yeah, tomorrow never knows. Yeah, Perm test super, you don't know, because the private key is gone. Also certificate Demo Server Cert 2, remove private key. So yeah, he can't go and abuse this. Then we're going to copy this to master, so I can retrieve the public key with this function called certEncoded, which accepts the ID of the certificate as a parameter, which I can retrieve with the function certID. So I'm going to retrieve that when it's a blob. I'm going to move to master. I'm going to use this form of create certificate. Create certificate Demo Server Cert 2 from binary equals that blob. I'm going to run this, but there is a snag. Incorrect syntax near public key. Because yes, that command does not apply, does not accept a variable. You actually have to type in the public key or use dynamic SQL. Why this one does not accept the variable, I don't know. The only good excuse I can think of is that they were very short on time and did not have the time to support variables. But yeah. Anyway, I have to redo this. But now I'm going to create this command, create certificate from Demo Server Cert 2 from binary equals, and then convert the binary to a hex string. And to do this conversion, I need to use the form 1, which gives me a hex string preceded by a 0x. If I don't give the type, it's actually going to take these as ASCII values, and you will get a string, which makes very little sense. And then I'm going to, well, I'm also going to print this out, move to master, and run that command. And here you can see, yes, how the command looks like. It's very, very exciting. Anyway, while I'm now in master, I'm going to create a login called Demo Server Cert 2 login from certificate Demo Server Cert 2, grant view server set to Demo Server Cert 2 login. And back to Perm test and Perm to super. It's going to try to run this. And now sees all sessions, and we have all, again, now Demo Server Cert 2 login and Demo Server Cert 2 in login tokens. Now, this demo of this script actually continues because there is a second way of doing the copying, which, well, you have to use if you still are in SQL 2005 or 2008, because this form, create certificate from binary, was added in SQL 2012. I'm not going to run that, but if you would have the need to run this on these two very old versions, you can find the script there. Now, as you might have guessed, we like to automate this. And indeed, I do have a script for you to do this. Yes, it's a script, not just a procedure, because I'm thinking that as a DBA, well, then you might want to, well, you want to run this script, well, that server over there to the left on Monday, that one, well, up on the top server there on Wednesday, on Friday, that one under the lower right corner. So it's much more handy to have it on disk and then open in Management Studio where you need it to run it right now. But if you want to make it just a procedure, you're more than welcome to just take it and change it to fit your needs. Oh, sure.
It's not from any of the other attendees, but from me actually.
Okay, that's all right.
Would it work the same if I put the stored procedure with the certificate and so on and put it in the model database?
In the model database? Well, let's see here. Yeah, and then you put it in the model. And then when you create a new database, you will get the certificate. You should get the procedure and the signature. Yes, but then you're going to change the procedure, and well, then in the one particular database, then you have to modify it in all databases. But yes, in this case, with show sessions, yeah, you could put that one in model. The thing I said about CSS, etc., is a kind of a joke. If of course you want to do that thing, you would of course put that in master, and whatever CSS tells you would say, yeah, we're going to do that. But yes, you could put that in model. I haven't tested, but I guess it would work. I'm not sure I would do it on the real server, but yes, you could put it in model.
I have some labbing to do tomorrow, it sounds. Okay.
Yeah, but as I said, if you go and change the procedure in, well, the problem is then, well, also if you have something utility procedures in lots of databases, and then you have to change it across the board and sign it all over the place to get the same public key. So that's a kind of interesting thing to deploy if you have the same procedures in multiple databases. Yes. Because then you have to copy it is possible to copy the private key as well. I didn't show that because we don't need to in this example, but yes, you could do that. There is a function called cert private key to retrieve the private key. Anyway, so if you don't have anything more, can move on.
No, move on.
Great. Oh, well, so as I said, if you can make this as the procedure if you want to, but anyway, what the script does then, well, first of all, you have to specify the database, the procedure, and the permissions. And then the scripts create a certificate in the user database, signs the procedure, and drops the private key. And copies the certificate to master, and creates a login from the certificate and grant permissions. What I did not get on the slide, but again, the name of the certificate and the login are given from the parameters, of course. And then there's one more thing, which is interesting. So let's say that if the database is an availability group, well, then you need the certificate and the login on all nodes in the AG, so it still works after a failover. And so what I do then, it loops over all the nodes in the AG, and then sets up a temporary linked server to copy over the stuff to the other nodes. If you add a new node to the AG later on, well, then you will have to either rerun the script or do that manually. So let's have a look at this script in action. So here, I have set up the database, perm test, procedure name, DBA show sessions. And here's the table variable. Because it's a script, I don't need the table type, view server state. And again, there is a debug flag. And here's also some queries we can run to look at this. And again, all this what comes afterwards, it's a lot of dynamic SQL that you're very welcome to look at, but I'm not going to go through it. And I'm just going to run this. And also because now the database name is dynamic, everything that is going to run in the user database will be dynamic SQL, and therefore it also prints out in which database the commands run. Now we can see here, the first thing is it checks, do we have a certificate with this particular name? And this one uses a different pattern for naming the certificate and the login, because, well, then there will be no clash between the database certificates and the server level certificates. So this one says sign, the database, schema, and show sessions. And here I use a mix of both double quotes and brackets for delimiting, so I don't have to go and double the brackets. That makes the code a lot easier to read. If you don't know this one serves exactly the same purpose as the brackets, to quote and identify with special characters. And then we'll also go and check if there is a user tied to the certificate. There shouldn't really be, but someone might have created that. Then we have to get rid of that guy, so we can also drop the certificate, etc. And then we go and create a new certificate, sign it, remove the private key, do the copy of the public key, and create the login. And you don't see the thing for an AG here because I don't have an AG on my laptop. You will have to trust me on that part. And if I rerun, you will see a few more commands being dropped on the server level. And we can also have a quick look at the certificates here. So here we have daemon server cert, and then we have this guy down here. And you can see also that grant view server state is the issue. Well, yes, both the issue name and the subject. It comes up as issue name as well, also when I don't specify anything else. Let's see, and here we have the logins. It's called just on this. We have this one here. So we can see that we have this logged in again. Okay, this is one for created for certificates. If you want a different name convention, just change it. That script is not by no means you're perfectly permitted to change it around it with the way you want. Now, before I leave the certificates, I'd like to discuss the beauty of all this. I think this is so elegant. So, as a server level DBA, you review the code, talk with the power user. Yes, these are the boundaries we agreed on. You're not stepping over this. So I'm going to add my blessing to it by doing this signing business. Now, if the power user decides, going back to his desk, I like the procedure to do this. Well, the power user can change the procedure, but the signature and the permissions will disappear, and the power user will have to come back to you. So you can review the changes and say, wait a minute, no, you're not supposed to do that. I'm not going to sign this. I don't agree with that. So as a DBA, you have full control. The power users cannot elevate the permissions behind your back. And also, what you see is what you sign. So you might be looking at this procedure and thinking, oh, wait a minute, it's called this other procedure. You don't have to worry because you know that the signature, or sorry, rather, that token will be removed from syslogin token when entering that module. So the permissions you package with that procedure is not going to apply to the sub-procedures, nor if it's an inserts or updates table in data in the table, the trigger may fire, but they will not run with elevated permissions. You have full control. I think this is very elegant. And that's also just exactly that thing with removing the tokens when you enter a user module. That's a very, very nice design. Now, let's look at execute as and permissions and use that instead. That's an alternate way to do this. I think it's more popular, it's more common out in the wild because it may seem simple to use, but yeah, it has issues. But anyway, we're going to first start to look at this at database level, and there is a proper version, and that is you create a proxy user without login with a name derived from the procedure. Then you grant the proxy user the required permissions, and then you add the clause with execute as sbname$proxy to this procedure. And typically you will have all of this in the same file as the procedure. It will have to come on the top of these two things, and will have to come on the top before you create this guy. Although you could put the permissions in a separate file if you want to have control as a power user. Sorry, I have some water.
I'm giving you the 1 minute warning of the, official 60 minutes. You can do it if you want to.
Yeah, well, as I told you, this will run for 75 minutes.
Yeah, no problem.
And I might be, 75. I'm thinking I'm a little behind anyway, to be honest. I blame that on your question. Anyway, there's also a lazy version. So I can say use with execute as owner and no proxy user, just go. So let's have a look at this. And we're going to move to Perm test, and we're going to create a new procedure, or at least the same procedure, but a new name, so we don't be confused by the signatures. So test proc, and this is the dynamic version, the bad dynamic SQL, and we're going to create rock and roll is also going to get permission to run test proc. Now, as a repetition of that bad dynamic SQL, test user now is going to run this and enter Norwegian wood. And you see here, Norwegian wood was entered, but we get an error on the dynamic part because ownership changing does not apply. Now, let's fix this with execute as. So we're going to create the user, test proc$proxy without login, and grant select on Perm table to test proc$proxy. And then I'm going to change the procedure. I'm going to say auto procedure test proc with execute as test proc$proxy. I'm going to add that line to the header of the procedure. And test user is now going to enter this, run this to enter back in the USSR. And you can see here now, well, back in the USSR was entered, and there's no error message, but things have changed. Back in the USSR was not entered by test user, it was entered by test proc$proxy. And if we look at the tokens here, we only see two of them, test proc$proxy and public. So things have changed. And also, these have also changed. Original login, it's still me because I was the one who logged in, but system
use... Your sound is gone. Oh. We don't hear you.
Oh. So it's better now?
I don't hear you. Sorry.
Oh.
Now I hear you.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so where did the sound disappear? I guess I need to go back.
No, it was just when I said it. So
okay. So anyway, so you can see here we have in the tokens we have testbox.proxy and public only, no test user. And these function here, well, this one still returns me, but system user returns, well, it's a SID because testbox.proxy is a user without login, but the user on database level, well, it's a testbox.proxy. This is because, well, this with execute as is the same thing as before. It's impersonation. It's not a matter of just adding a token to this user token. No, we are John Malkovich. So it's quite different technique. And let's now have a look at this. What happens? We're going to re-add this trigger. And then we're going to do this version that runs SP help index, the init procedure, and then does the insert that fires the trigger. And okay, I thought I dropped that trigger. I'm quite sure that did. Oh, well. Then maybe I don't need it. Well, anyway. So, and test use now is going to run this to enter drive my car. And first of all, we can see that SP help index does not error out. So we are still testbox.proxy when we enter that system procedure. Now look here at inresp. Test is p.proxy, the trigger. Test is testbox.proxy, testbox.proxy. So it's not the same thing as when we use certificates and the token was removed. When we enter that procedure, now we're not reverting back to test user. We remain testbox.proxy. Now this can have quite some ramifications. Let's say that inresp is doing some retrieval, well, something based on row level security, maybe not exactly right in that procedure, but somewhere down the line. And it's based on system user. Well, that one is going to return the wrong information, maybe nothing at all. Or let's say that this one is doing auditing based on system user. It's not going to log the right login. So that's kind of devilish. Now, so far, the proper version, here we have the lazy version. So testbox.2 with execute as owner, which is the same thing as DBO, the owner of the procedure. And now we're going to, this was the reset version. And test user, and also we need to grant permissions to rock and roll. And test user now is going to run this to enter with a little help from my friends. And indeed, with a little help from his friend DBO, test user was again able to clear the table. Look here at the tokens. DBO, public DB owner, system user, SA. Quite scary, isn't it? And let's go back to look at this bad dynamic SQL. Let's say that this one had execute as owner. No, sorry. This was the one with a bad dynamic SQL. Now let's say that this one says execute as owner. This would mean that now, if that would be the case, test user could inject anything in the database. For example, well, let's say auto role DB owner add member test user. Well, okay, that doesn't fit the 40 characters, but it could still do, well, drop table important or whatever. Quite a bit of damage. So that's quite kind of scary. Before I leave this, you might want to know, how can I find out which procedure that to have execute as? So it's quite simple. In sys SQL modules, there is this column called execute as principal ID, which is not null when this clause exists. And this one ID, well, can just put it to username to get back the name of the user, except for the special value -2, which means owner. So when I run this, we can see that testblock.2 has execute as owner and testblock has execute as testblock.proxy. So yes, execute as, no doubt, it's a lot simpler than certificates. You just put this line in, not kind of strange magic, but first of all, the lazy version breaks the principle of granting minimum permissions. I think this is a very important thing in itself. Also, it breaks the scheme for row level security and auditing, etc., based on system user, username, all of these functions, basically all of these functions that return the current user will be broken, except for original login. So you can use, so it's this one is not a complete showstopper, because you can use original login, or you can also use the function session context, which is itself does not return any information, but you can use the function sp set session context to specify the current user, or context info. That's an older version way back in for SQL 2014. This one was added in SQL 2016. Now you might be saying to yourself, wait a minute, we're using system user all over the place. What if any of our developers get the idea of adding execute as? Oh, you might get nervous. I do have a fix for you. I do have a DDL trigger that is going to say execute as is not permitted in this database. I'm already over time, so I'm not going to show you this, but you might be interested to have a look at that. Now, you might still thinking that despite all I said, no, we don't use system users, no problem. We all got this clear. And this is just so much simpler than certificates. I want to use this on server level as well. And you think, how difficult can it be? I guess I create a proxy login, disable it, grant permissions, add execute as. I mean, yeah, how difficult can it be? Well, let's have a look at that. So I'm going to move to master. I'm going to create a login here called show sessions $2 with the password of magical mystery tour. And I'm going to disable that login because it's not supposed to be able to log in. I'm going to grant that login, view server state. I'm going to move to perm test, and I'm going to create a user for that proxy login. And then I'm going to create procedure show sessions 2 with execute as show sessions $2 proxy. And I have to make a modification to it because this check on is server row member. If I don't do this, well, then we go and check this guy, which is of course completely wrong. But I can revert to the caller's context with execute as caller to do the permission check. So much for this actually being simpler. Here it actually added a complication. But, well, we might still think it's simpler. So we do this, and we're going to test this ourselves. And wait, we only see our own sessions. And wait a minute, I'm sysadmin. What's this going on there? What? Well, look, let's look at this one. So it shows sessions $2 proxy, public, SQL again, view server. Deny only. Oh, that's a new one. It only says deny only. Well, why? So this is the story. If you put in execute as in this procedure, this is just a short for execute as user. And when you impersonate a database user, you are sandboxed into the current database because your context is not trusted outside the database. This is a quite important thing. When you impersonate something in one context, that impersonation should not be trusted elsewhere outside of it, for reasons that will prevail. I'm going to come back to that in a scary demo later on. But, however, in this case, the sandbox is not entirely closed. There are actually 2 doors here, 2 which can be opened. And one door to get out of the sandbox. The database must be set to trustworthy. And then a door open where we want to get into. In this case, this is the server level. And the database owner must have the permissions authenticate server. Now, this database is owned by SA, so that permission is already present. That door is already open. All we need to do is to make the database trustworthy. So we're going to do that. Set all the database perm test that's trustworthy on. And you can run the command. And now, yes, we see the sessions. And we can see here now, we got 1/3 row here, SA SQL login authenticated, which you can say, well, is so kind of vouching for these logins. Yeah, I know these guys, they're okay. And this one has been trusted to do this vouching. It has the authenticate permission. And we can also do this as perm to super. And the same thing happens here. Again, we see all the database. So you might thinking there that, this was just so much easier, trustworthy, just forget about all those certificates. They're just trustworthy is a security risk. Beware of that. First of all, remember, when we use certificates as a DBA, you can review the code every time the power user makes a change and say, no, wait, that's okay. No, you can't do that. I'm not agreeing with that. So you have full control of what the power user is doing. But if you say, okay, I'm going to make the database trustworthy, you're giving the power user carte blanche to change the procedure just to whatever the user wants. I mean, that filter on DBID is just going to, the user comes back to the disk and then it's removed. He's going to see all users, no problem. But that's not all. Red alert, red alert. So for this demo, I'm not going to do the impersonation thing. I'm actually going to log in as perm test super explicitly with the password of yesterday. So we're going to move to perm test and we're going to look at the information after we log into info and also going to have a check am I a member of sysadmin? And you can see, no, I'm not a member of sysadmin. We have the tokens, perm to super, public, super users. And all these three now reads perm to super because I'll log in as perm to super. But look here now, execute as user DBO. And then perm test super is taking over the server. Is sysadmin? Yes. Token names SA public sysadmin and also SA as authenticator. And look here, system user reports SA, DB user DBO. So guess who gets the blame if auditing is done by system user, which is very, very common. Yes, original login will tell that it was perm to super, but system user is the kind of default thing to use that many people do. And just to show you, it's not a joke, I can do this, I can, well, SP configure requires sysadmin. Yep, that works. So, you might recall that I told you that having SA as a database owner is not best practice. So let's change that. My idea what is best practice is that each database should be owned by an SQL login, which exists only to own that database. So it should certainly not be a real user, with all that means if that one leaves the company, etc. So I'm going to create that login called permtest.owner, and I don't want to know the passwords, so it will be a GUID. And I'm also going to disable that login just to make sure there are no accidents, and I'm going to make that login an owner of permtest. Now, logging back in again as permtest super. And he's now going to try to run this DBO thing again. And no, he is not sysadmin. Great. But, however, as you might guess, what's going to happen when he runs this command? He only sees his own session. And he says, deny only. Permtest.owner appears as authenticator, but permtest.owner does not have any permissions. Now, I said that we should not grant this one any other permissions, but let's just say we can try this to see what happens. So I'm going to move to master. I'm now logged in as myself and grant authenticate server to permtest.owner. And again, logging in as permtest super. And now permtest super again sees all sessions because now this one has authenticate server and can vouch for these guys. So, and now he's going to try to play the DBO stunt again. And he's not sysadmin. It seems that we have tightened that hole. That seems we have fixed. Wait a minute, what's going on here? He's creating a user for me in his database. Oh, wait, what's the point? And then he's impersonating me. And he is sysadmin again. You can't have the cake and eat it. There's no way around that. So if you make a database trustworthy and the database owner has authenticate server, this means that any user in that database who have DBA rights, or more precisely, rights to create and impersonate users in that database, can elevate to sysadmin with these very simple steps. That's kind of scary. So that's my recommendation. The owner of each database should be a unique SQL login that exists only to own that database. My thinking about this, if someone tells you, oh, you need to make the database trustworthy. Well, trustworthy sounds so, well, innocent that you might do that because you feel in a lot of work. But then someone tells you, oh, you also need to grant authenticate server to the DB login. I like to believe it's a kind of a knee-jerk reaction that, wait a minute, should I really do that? Permissions, what does that one do? Should I do this? At least that is my hope. Now, all this said, I should say this. There are lots of servers in this world where this is not really a problem because everyone who have rights to create users in the database, etc., they are already sysadmin because there are no local power users on database level. And of course, in that case, it doesn't really matter because there's no one who can elevate. They are already elevated, every one of them. So then you can use trustworthy. But also, if you are sure that this will never change, you might bring in a consultant that's going to do some performance tuning. So, okay, DB owner and all the trace and view server state. Yeah, that actually happened to me a couple of months back. I should do some work for one particular database on a server with several databases. And yep, so I got exactly that. And then, oh, that database is trustworthy. No, I did not abuse it, but yeah. So it can easily happen. So be careful with this one. So I'm already running over my 75 minutes. So this is going to be very, very quick about cross-database access. So in the database A, you have a procedure P that accesses a table T in database B. And by default, there is no ownership chaining across databases. So if you do nothing at all, well, that will be a permission error. Now, how to deal with this? Well, it depends on the situations, because why we do cross-database access, there's more than one reason to this. So I will cover this just very, very briefly. Now, first of all, you might just simply raise the white flag and say, okay, I'm going to grant permissions, add users to B and then grant the permissions on T and be done with it. And sometimes that works, but sometimes it's not always acceptable. Now, you can enable cross-database ownership chaining, so you can have ownership chaining, and you can do that for both databases. You need to do it for both databases, or on server level, but don't do that. You would still add the users to B, though, if you do this. But there's one really big problem here. It has exactly the same security problem as Trustworthy. It's more difficult, well, more complicated tool, more steps to abuse it, but yes, you can do it. I discussed this in my article, how you do that. So certificate signing, and I will say this is the perfect in the situation where you have occasional calls between different applications. So let's say the payroll database needs to access the HR database in 2 places. Yeah, it's a perfect thing to do. So here's the very, very brief recipe. You create the certificate in the database B, you create the user, grant permissions on T, copy it to A, and sign it to P. I don't have a script to automate this for you. That is left to an exercise to the reader. I do discuss these steps in more detail in my article. Now, one really cool thing with this is that you don't need to add the users to B, because that permission also comes with a certificate. Now, if you have a multi-database application with lots of calls, cross and back, forth and back, and cross-references, then this is not really fun to have to do this on every procedure. And yes, execute as and trustworthy could be a choice if done right. And I think it's a better alternative than cross-database ownership chain, but it has to be done right. First of all, the database should be owned by the same SQL again with no server level permissions. Previously, I said that each database should have its own owner, but if the database is somehow part of the same application, yep, it makes sense to have the same owner. And the same set of people must be DBA owner in all databases. If, for example, there are multiple databases exactly because of they're going to access security boundaries being administered by different people, well, then you can't do this, because then you will have the same elevation problem as I showed you before. So if this doesn't work out well, then you will have to use certificates if you want to have security. And my article discusses this. That's a whole chapter about this in a lot more detail. Just a quick recap of what I've been talking about. So ownership chaining is what you are used 95% of the time. Probably not with even thinking about it, and you use it for plain and simple DML, but it does not work with dynamic SQL. It does not work with advanced permissions, nor with metadata, nor for server level permissions, and it's disabled by default for cross-database access. Certificates, well, they permit you to package about any database or server level permissions or cross-database permissions and as the procedures in a very fine-grained way where you have very full control exactly what the user can do. It's very easy to manage with the grant perms SP and the script for server level permissions. So even if you did not understand exactly everything, you might get the idea what this is doing, and you can start using these today if you feel like. I would say this is the preferred method for database permissions, and always use certificates for server level permissions. Then we have execute as well. It's good for the lazy and casual. I can't deny that. But it has implications for auditing and row level security that requires you to plan ahead. Yeah, so much for being lazy and casual. You have to design your database to be able to use execute as. So it's not really as simple as it might seem. I can't say I like it, but I would say it's okay to use for database permissions. Well, if conditions are relaxed, but for server level permissions, always use certificate signing, because that trustworthy thing is just creepy. And well, yeah. So it's getting very near the end. My name is Erland Sommarskog. My email address, SQL@sommarskog.se if you have any questions. Again, slides and script on my website, sommarskog.se/present. If you run this on your own, there is this script, clean up all, that would just drop the database and everything that was created in the master database on server level. So here are also the links to the articles. There's actually 2 of them. There is a main article, and everything I talked about is in that main article. The appendix covers special applications, special cases, or shows applications like, for example, if you write an activation procedure with Service Broker, then at least thinking to understand exactly how that works and why you have to do it the way it works to understand all that. That took me quite a few years to understand fully. thankfully, the article will tell you what you need to do. So thank you very much for listening. And yes, one more thing, be aware of trustworthy. So do we have any more questions, Magnus?
Nothing from the chat, no. So I think either people are still confused by all the information, or it was very clear. I think a combination of them.
Yeah, so as I said, I wrote this first article, I think the first version of this article in 2006. And some of these things, I understood the mechanics, I had the scripts, but then I remember a couple of years later, I got one query someone was doing, well, it was related to Authenticate Server, and it was about that time pennies started to drop. Oh yeah, why things are like they are and so on.
I worked in a place where they had used Trustworthy because they started reading that article and thought, oh, this is going to work for us. And then someone read the rest of the article and they Trustworthy away.
Yes, also common to use Trustworthy when you have assemblies, because there's also some steps you have to do there. So Trustworthy said, they added this one, and also this execute as, they added this in 2005. But yeah, the weird thing is that if you can still put the impersonation inside of the procedure, but then the user needs explicit permission, but then you can do that with the certificate signing and package the impersonate permission. As a matter of, that's also one thing I talk about in the appendix. So for example, if you want to have guard access to a linked server where you cannot use self-mapping, that's one of the examples. Another example is about how to start jobs through specific jobs that uses to do that.
I mean, maybe we gave people a warning about the article being very thorough, even more thorough than the presentation, but it is a very good read. And if you really want to understand permissions and how you should do things properly, then I really recommend the read. And especially so if you have different applications with different sets of users, then never ever take the easy way out. Read the article and try to understand it instead.
Yeah, and I should also say that if, depending on where you need to do this, I have some in the beginning some reading guidance. So if you're only going to need to do this on database level, you don't need to read the full thing. I think you only need to read the first 5 chapters or something like that. If you need to do it across database, you really need to read the whole thing, because a lot of that I talk about server level comes back there. And then also for the stuff in the appendix, I tell for every appendix, for every chapter, that, well, you need to have read this. So
that's good. I think we have Mohit on the call. Are you in?
Yes. Hi, Magnus.
I can hear you. Perfect. I can't see you though, but hearing you is a good start.
Yeah, I'll just switch on my camera.
No problem. Erland, thank you so much. You're very welcome to stick around as a panelist if you want to. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah, I might stay for the next few minutes, chap. I don't think I'm going to do Mohit's presentation. To be honest, I don't remember what you were supposed to talk about.
It's about Delta Lake and Azure Databricks.
Okay, yeah, I will have to confess that is outside my area. I think I've heard some presentation about Databricks, but I know nothing that I use, so I might drop out. But
thank you so much for presenting, though. As usual, I enjoyed it, and as I said, people don't be afraid of the length of the article. It's a good article. You don't have to swallow it all at once, but it's a very good read, I think.
Yeah. As I understand everything as why it works that way, etc. That takes a lot of time. But then again, to just use the mechanics, well, I just take the scripts, adopt them, running, and have to accept it's kind of a black magic.
True. Mohit, do you need to test if you can screen share, or do we trust the trusted technology to work?
Yeah, I'll just share my screen. Is it okay?
Yeah.
And hope you can see me as well.
I can see you, yes. And now I stopped sharing, so you can start sharing if you want to test.
Sure. Can you see my screen?
I see the screen, yes. So it seems to work. Perfect. Then I will take over the screen share again, and we are good to go in 4 minutes, I think.
Sure.
There we have it, share screen. Come on. Where in the world are you, Mohit?
I'm from